He threw me out with nothing but a suitcase. No questions. No chance to explain. One minute, I was his wife, the woman who built his home, carried his burdens, and the next, I was a stranger he couldn't look in the eye. All because of her. Ivy stood in that courtroom, pointed straight at me, and spun a story so convincing even Edward, my Edward, believed her. But what they didn't know was that I was holding something they couldn't escape. The truth that would tear their perfect little world apart. Asterisk. Before we get into this, tell me, where are you watching this from? Comment your city below, backhand index pointing down. And if this moment stopped you in your tracks the way it did everyone in that courtroom, hit that subscribe button and like this video right now, because what happens next will shock you even more. Now, let's rewind to how this incredible moment started. Asterisk. My name is Nora, and until recently, I thought I had the perfect life. I thought I was safe. I thought love, hard work, and loyalty were enough to hold a family together. But I was wrong. Every morning, I woke before the sun. I brewed Edward's coffee the way he liked it, strong, dark, no sugar, and laid out his jacket for work. I checked the bills, balanced the books, made sure there was food in the fridge. The house was quiet at that hour, so quiet I could almost hear my own heartbeat echoing in the walls. This was my rhythm, my purpose. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for much. My job was to keep our home steady, so Edward could keep chasing his dreams. People admired him. They said he was disciplined, brilliant, a man who built his business from the ground up. They weren't wrong. But no one ever saw the woman standing in the background, holding everything together while he built that empire. I saw myself as his partner, maybe not in his office, but in every invisible way that mattered. But lately, something had shifted. Edward's good morning kiss had become an absent-minded peck on the cheek. Our dinners had turned into hurried meals eaten in silence, with him scrolling through his phone. And the little moments, the ones that used to make me feel seen, had disappeared. And then there was Ivy. Ivy wasn't cruel, not openly. She was Edward's daughter from before we met, and I tried, God knows I tried, to be what she needed me to be. A friend, a mentor, maybe even a second mother. But she always looked at me like I was intruding. The first thing she said to me this morning, "Did you move my charger again?" I hadn't touched it. I told her so, but she just sighed, rolled her eyes, and muttered something under her breath. Edward was standing right there, tying his tie. He didn't scold her. He didn't defend me. He just said, "Check the kitchen counter, Ivy," like I was invisible. That was the moment I felt it again, the wall between us. I shook it off like I always did. I poured Edward's coffee, handed him his briefcase, and smiled. Because that's what I did every day. I smiled and I stayed. But deep down, something was cracking. And if I had known how far that crack would spread, how it would split open my marriage, my home, and the life I thought was mine, I might have walked away right then and there. But I didn't. I stayed. And that choice would cost me everything. The day stretched on quietly after they left. I wiped down the counters, folded the laundry, tried to fill the silence with chores. But no matter how many tasks I ticked off the list, the house still felt empty, hollow, like I was a guest in my own home. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror and not recognize her. The woman who used to laugh so freely now carried dark circles under her eyes and a tightness in her chest that never seemed to go away. Ivy came back that afternoon, chatting on the phone with one of her friends. She didn't greet me. She just dropped her bag on the floor and disappeared into her room, the door shutting with a dull thud. I pretended it didn't sting. I always pretended. That night, Edward came home late. I had kept dinner warm, as I always did. He barely touched it, distracted, his eyes on his phone. Ivy joined him, talking about her day, laughing at something on her screen. I sat across the table, smiling faintly, feeling like a shadow in my own house. "You're quiet tonight," Edward said at last, not looking up from his plate. I wanted to tell him everything. How invisible I felt, how much it hurt that Ivy dismissed me, how lonely it was holding this family together when no one seemed to notice. Instead, I said, "Just tired." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to his phone. After dinner, I cleaned up alone. I could hear Edward and Ivy laughing in the living room. Their voices were low, but every so often, my name drifted through their conversation, followed by a pause. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, something in me knew this was more than just distance. Something was coming, something that would change everything. When I finally climbed into bed, Edward was already asleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady sound of his breathing. A single tear slipped down my cheek. I told myself tomorrow would be better. I was wrong. Tomorrow would be the first step toward losing everything I thought I could never lose. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Sleep hadn't come easily, and my mind was still heavy with last night's silence. The air felt colder somehow, even though the heater hummed softly in the corner. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, the tiles icy under my feet, and started breakfast before the first light touched the windows. As I cracked eggs into the pan, my thoughts drifted to the early days of my marriage. Back then, Edward used to wake up before me just to make coffee. He'd kiss my forehead and tell me I was his anchor, his safe place. Those words used to fill me with pride. I carried them like a secret vow, letting them push me through the hardest days. But lately, they felt like a distant memory. The smell of eggs and toast filled the kitchen by the time Edward walked in. He gave me that polite smile he reserved for acquaintances and murmured a distracted morning. Ivy followed close behind, phone in hand, thumbs tapping furiously. She didn't look at me when she said, "Dad, I can't find my jacket. I think Nora put it somewhere again." Edward glanced at me, not accusing, but not defending either. "Could you check the laundry room, Nora?" "I didn't move it," I said softly. "Just check," he said, already reaching for his coffee. I did check. It wasn't there, of course. Ivy found it hanging on the back of a chair a few minutes later and offered a faint, unconvincing "oh, never mind." No apology. Not even eye contact. Edward didn't comment. The moment passed like every other, small, quiet, but sharp enough to leave a mark. After breakfast, Edward left for work, and Ivy disappeared into her room. The house fell quiet again. I sat at the table long after the dishes were done, staring at the empty chairs. My chest felt heavy, as if the silence itself was pressing against me. In the afternoon, I decided to get some air. I walked to the small market down the street, greeted the shopkeeper with a tired smile, and bought fresh vegetables for dinner. On the way back, I passed two women from the neighborhood whispering to each other. They nodded politely at me, but as soon as I walked by, their voices dropped even lower. I had no proof, but I could swear I heard Ivy's name. When I got home, Ivy was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Oh, you're back," she said, as though my presence were an afterthought. "Dad said we might go out tonight. You don't have to cook." He didn't tell me. I replied, keeping my tone light. She shrugged. "He told me." Maybe he forgot. The words stung, but I swallowed them. If Edward had really forgotten to tell me, what else was he forgetting? Or worse, what else was he choosing not to say? That night, they did go out together, just Edward and Ivy, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside. The house creaked every now and then, and each sound reminded me how empty it felt. When they came home later, laughter filled the entryway. Ivy was telling a story about something that happened at dinner, and Edward's voice joined hers, deep and warm, the way it used to sound when he spoke to me. I stayed in the kitchen, unseen, listening to them pass by. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I belonged in this house anymore. Days turned into weeks, each one blurring into the next. Ivy's small accusations became more frequent. Things I supposedly moved, words she claimed I said but didn't, moments twisted into something crueler. And Edward, my Edward, seemed to believe them without hesitation. He never shouted, never accused me directly, but his eyes began to hold questions that he didn't voice. One afternoon, I overheard Ivy on the phone. I hadn't meant to listen, but her door was cracked, and her voice carried down the hallway. "She won't be here much longer," she whispered. "Trust me, I've got this." My stomach twisted. I wanted to walk in and demand answers, but fear held me still. Fear of confirming what my heart already suspected. That evening, I set the table for 3, but dinner was tense. Ivy brought up a missing bracelet. "It was in my room," she said, "and now it's gone." Edward's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Nora, have you seen it? No, I said, steady but quiet. I haven't. Ivy gave me a look that sent a chill down my spine, a look that said she had planted a seed and was waiting for it to grow. After they went to bed, I stayed up late cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing until my hands ached. I needed something to do, something to keep from falling apart. The house was dark and still, and in the window's reflection, I saw my own face, tired, lined with worry. Just hold on, I whispered to myself. Just hold on a little longer. But the air felt heavier every day. The laughter between Edward and Ivy grew louder. The silences between Edward and me grew longer. And somewhere deep down, I began to wonder if the life I had built was already slipping through my fingers. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling again, but this time I didn't cry. This time I felt something colder settling in my chest, the quiet, creeping sense that a storm was on its way. And when it hit, it wouldn't just shake this house. It would tear it apart. The storm I had felt creeping and finally broke the night Ivy made her move. It was a Thursday, the kind of quiet evening when the house should have felt peaceful. I had cooked Edward's favorite roast, hoping it might bring us closer again. The table was set, candles glowing softly, but I couldn't shake the knot forming in my stomach. Edward came home looking tired but composed. Ivy followed, her expression unreadable. We sat down to eat, the clink of silverware filling the silence, until Ivy spoke. "Dad," she began softly, almost timidly, "there's something I need to tell you. But I don't want to hurt you." Edward's fork stilled. "What is it?" Ivy glanced at me, then back at him. "It's about Nora." My heart dropped. I didn't want to say anything before, she continued, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "But I've seen her. With someone else. At the cafe, near the square." She was holding his hand. Edward's head snapped toward me, his eyes darkening. "What is she talking about?" "She's lying," I said immediately, my voice shaking. "Edward, you know I would never." "That's not all." Ivy cut in quickly, as if afraid I might talk my way out of it. "I also found money missing from the drawer in your office. And I didn't want to believe it, but who else could it be?" "Edward," I whispered, pleading now, "you can't believe this. Please. You know me." But he didn't know me. Not in that moment. He pushed back from the table, his face hard. "Enough. Just tell me the truth, Nora. Are you seeing someone else? Did you take that money?" "No." The word tore from me like a sob. "I have never betrayed you. Not once. Not ever. You have to believe me." But his jaw was set, his fists clenched at his sides. "I can't do this anymore," he said coldly. "I won't have lies under my roof. Pack your things." The room spun. "Edward, please." I said, "Pack your things." His voice cracked like a whip, and for a moment the house went dead silent. Ivy lowered her gaze, as though ashamed, but there was the faintest glint of victory in her eyes. I rose from the table on shaking legs and went to our bedroom. My vision blurred with tears as I pulled clothes from drawers, folding them with numb, mechanical movements. Each shirt, each dress felt like a piece of my life being stripped away. When I came across our wedding photo on the nightstand, I sat on the edge of the bed and clutched it to my chest. "How do we get here?" I whispered to the empty room. When the suitcase was full, I slipped my wedding ring from my finger and stared at it for a long time. It felt heavy, like it carried all the years I had given to this marriage. I tucked it into my palm and closed my fist around it until my knuckles ached. Edward was waiting in the hallway when I emerged. His face was stone. He didn't speak. He didn't stop me. Ivy stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded, watching me like a guard, making sure the job was done. I met her gaze for one long, searing second before turning away. Outside, the night air was sharp against my tear-streaked face. I loaded the suitcase into the car and slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my hands trembled. The house loomed behind me, glowing warm and safe, but it was no longer mine. When I finally turned the key and pulled away, the tears came hot and unstoppable. The road ahead blurred, but I kept driving because there was nothing left for me behind those walls. I didn't know it then, but that night was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the war that would rip our lives apart. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would not just clear my name. It would burn everything they thought they knew to the ground. When I stepped outside that night, the air was sharp against my face. I loaded the suitcase into the car, my wedding ring clutched tight in my palm. I didn't even know where I was going. I just drove, mile after mile, the taillights behind me disappearing until the road felt like it belonged only to me. By the time the sky began to lighten, I had to pull over. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Grace, my best friend. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft with sleep. "Nora? What's wrong?" The words tumbled out between sobs. The fight, the accusations, the way Edward had looked at me like I was a stranger. I told her I had nowhere to go. Grace didn't hesitate. "Come here, right now. I don't care what time it is. You're not going through this alone." I drove the rest of the way with tears streaking my cheeks until I pulled up outside her house. Grace lived in a quiet part of town, the kind of place where the world still felt gentle. She opened the door before I could knock and pulled me into a hug so tight I broke all over again. "You're safe now," she whispered. And for the first time all night, I let myself believe her. Then came the fever. Grace found me shivering on the floor one morning and rushed me to the hospital. The doctor's diagnosis was blunt: a severe infection, likely untreated for weeks. The test results that followed were worse, an infection that could only have been passed to me by Edward. I lay in a hospital bed numb, staring at the ceiling tiles, letting the reality settle like lead in my chest. Edward hadn't just broken my heart. He had left me with a reminder of his betrayal that I now had to fight to survive. The treatment was rough, strong medication, endless tests, but slowly my body began to recover. Grace visited every day, bringing flowers, books, and quiet reminders that I was still here, still alive. "You are more than what they did to you," she told me. "When you're strong again, you'll remember who you are." When I was discharged, I promised myself I would start again, one step at a time. I began eating proper meals, walking in Grace's garden, letting the sun touch my face. At night, I journaled everything: the pain, the anger, the memories of Edward's good years and the years that had slipped away. Healing didn't come all at once, but one morning I realized I had gone an hour without thinking of Edward or Ivy. Then a day, and one evening, Grace made a joke and I laughed. Really laughed. That was the moment I knew I wasn't gone. Not completely. Somewhere under all the wreckage, Nora was still here. And I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to rise from it. And when I did, Edward and Ivy would see exactly what they had thrown away. Grace's home became my refuge, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. Slowly, as my strength returned, I started thinking about what came next. The idea of facing the world again terrified me, but I couldn't let Edward and Ivy's lies be the last word on my life. One morning, Grace found me at the kitchen table, staring at my journal. "You need to see your family," she said gently. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." My family. The word made my chest tighten. I hadn't spoken to them in years, not since Edward and I married. They had never trusted him, never approved of the life I chose. I was the one who put the distance between us. But Grace was right. If there was ever a time I needed them, it was now. It took days to gather the courage, but I finally picked up the phone. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice trembling when she heard mine. "Nora," she said softly, like she wasn't sure if it was really me. I broke down right there. All the walls I had built over the years crumbled as I told her everything. About Ivy's lies, Edward's anger, the infection, being thrown out with nothing but a suitcase. "Come home," she said through tears. "Please, just come home." Grace insisted on driving me. When we pulled into my parents' long driveway, I felt like a child again, nervous and small. But when I stepped out of the car, my mother was already running toward me, pulling me into her arms. My father stood behind her, his expression heavy but not unkind. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine, familiar, comforting. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, talking about everything I had held back for so long. My father listened quietly, his hand resting on mine. "I always worried about you," he said finally, "but I didn't know it was this bad." In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. My parents didn't just welcome me back, they rallied around me. They called my siblings, my aunt, my uncles. The house filled with voices, with warmth, with the kind of love I had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by people who were on my side. And then came the shock. One evening, my father and mother sat me down in the study. My father opened a heavy envelope and slid a stack of papers across the desk. "This is our will," he said. "We've made some changes. We've seen what you've gone through, and we won't stand by while you're left with nothing. Everything we have, the estates, the shares, the trusts, will come to you." I stared at him, stunned. "But why me?" "Because you've paid more than your share in pain," my mother said softly. "Because we trust you to protect this family's name. And because we want you to know you're not powerless." Tears blurred my vision as I nodded. It wasn't just about the money, though the numbers made my head spin. It was about being seen, being believed. For so long, I had felt like a ghost, silenced and erased. But here, with my family's arms around me, I felt solid again. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with them. I helped my mother in the kitchen, sat on the porch with my father, and let my siblings pull me into late-night conversations. Slowly, I remembered what it felt like to be Nora before Edward. Strong, certain, alive. One afternoon, my father handed me a set of keys. "These are to the city house," he said. "It's yours now. If you're going to fight this battle, you need a place of your own to do it from." I turned the keys over in my hand, feeling their weight. A home of my own, a place where I could stand on my own feet again. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I am not the same woman who left Edward's house. I am stronger. I am not just surviving. I am preparing." For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I lay awake with my heart beating steady and sure, feeling something new take root inside me. Resolve. Edward and Ivy thought they had broken me. They thought they had written the ending to my story. But they were wrong. This was just the beginning of my fight back. The day I moved into the city house my parents had given me, I stood still in the empty living room, the keys heavy in my hand. The silence felt different here, not heavy like the silence in Edward's house, but open, waiting. This was mine, my space, my fresh start. Grace came with me that morning, her arms full of flowers and throw pillows. "It's time you felt at home somewhere again," she said with a smile. Together we opened windows, let in the light, and turned the house into a place where laughter might one day live. For the first time in months, I felt my lungs fill all the way. But peace wasn't enough. Deep down, anger simmered, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. Ivy had lied. Edward had believed her, and I had been left to carry the weight of their betrayal. No more. The next week, I met with a private investigator named Cole. He was calm, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I told him everything, the accusations, the money, the way Ivy smiled when I walked out with my suitcase. Cole leaned back in his chair. "Lies leave footprints," he said, "and we're going to follow every single one." He was right. Within weeks, Cole returned with a thick file. "You might want to sit for this," he said, sliding it across my kitchen table. Inside were bank records, withdrawals Ivy had made under Edward's accounts, photos of Ivy meeting with friends, laughing as she bragged about getting rid of me, and then the text messages, the proof I had been waiting for. Screenshots where Ivy admitted she made up the affair story just to turn Edward against me. I stared at the evidence until the letters blurred. Part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry, but mostly I felt something settle inside me. Vindication. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the villain. But the decision wasn't about just clearing my name anymore. This was about making sure they could never do this to me or anyone else again. I took the folder to my lawyer the next day. "I want this public," I told her. "I want my name cleared legally, and I want them held accountable." She smiled grimly. "Then we're going to court." The next month was a blur of legal meetings, filings, and strategy sessions. Every step made me stronger. I moved through my new house with purpose now, my steps steady, my back straight. Grace joked that she hardly recognized me, and she meant it in the best way. Meanwhile, word began to spread. People started asking questions about Edward and Ivy. His business partners grew distant. The perfect facade they had built around themselves was starting to crack. One night, I sat alone in the living room, the evidence spread out before me. I picked up my wedding ring, the one I hadn't been able to throw away, and turn it over in my fingers. "I'm not coming back for you," I whispered. "I'm coming back for me." The morning the court date was confirmed, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked stronger, fiercer, ready. Grace squeezed my hand as we prepared to leave. "You've come so far," she said softly. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, you've already won." But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Before we step into that courtroom together, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's standing with me tonight. And if you've ever been betrayed, abandoned, or accused of something you didn't do, smash that like button right now, so I know I'm not alone. Because what's coming next isn't just about me clearing my name. It's about burning every lie they built around me to the ground. Subscribe so you don't miss it. You won't want to look away when the truth finally explodes in that courtroom. This isn't revenge. This is justice. And it's only getting started. After I gathered all the evidence with Cole, my lawyer wasted no time. She drafted the official complaint, detailing every accusation, every lie, every financial withdrawal that had been blamed on me. Seeing my name at the top of those papers, not as a defendant, but as the plaintiff, felt like breathing for the first time in months. A few days later, Edward was served. Grace was with me when the notification came through from my lawyer. He has been served. I pictured Edward answering the door, receiving the envelope with my name on it, opening it to see the lawsuit staring back at him. Part of me felt a pang. This was the man I once built a life with, but another part of me felt steady, grounded. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was about truth. From that moment, everything began to move quickly. Edward's lawyer tried to call mine to arrange a private settlement. I refused. This wasn't going to be brushed under the rug. This had to be heard in front of a judge, where the lies had first destroyed me. Edward had no choice but to respond, and when the date was set, I knew there was no turning back. The summons made it real for everyone. Ivy went quiet on social media. Edward stopped appearing at public events. The whispers started, but this time they weren't about me. They were about them. By the time the first court date arrived, I was ready. Dressed in a simple navy dress, my hair pinned back, I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer at my side and my family behind me. I wasn't the broken woman they had thrown out. I was someone they could no longer ignore. And that was the day this fight truly began. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. I could feel every eye on me as I walked to my seat, my lawyer by my side. Grace and my parents sat directly behind me, their presence a silent shield. Across the room, Edward sat with his lawyer, his jaw tight, his suit perfect. Ivy sat beside him, fidgeting with her phone until the bailiff told her to put it away. The judge entered, and the room rose. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Breathing exercises, therapy sessions, long nights staring at the evidence until I no longer flinched when I saw Ivy's name. My lawyer began by laying out the case with precision. The accusations against me, the damage to my reputation, the financial and emotional devastation I had endured. As she spoke, I watched Edward's face. His expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered every time she said false accusations or fabricated evidence. Then it was Ivy's turn on the stand. She looked smaller than I remembered, suddenly unsure of herself. My lawyer's questions were calm, deliberate, each one peeling back a layer until Ivy's story began to falter. "You claimed you saw Nora with another man at the cafe," my lawyer said, her tone even. "Can you produce any proof of that?" Ivy shifted in her seat. "I didn't take pictures, so we have only your word." "Yes, but—" "And you also claimed Nora stole money from the house. Are you aware we have bank records showing you made several withdrawals from your father's account during the time you accuse her of theft?" Ivy's mouth opened, closed. Her gaze darted to Edward, who was suddenly very still. "Would you like me to read the amounts?" my lawyer asked. "Or perhaps show the court the messages you sent to your friend bragging about finally getting her out of the house?" Ivy's face went pale. The courtroom murmured until the judge called for silence. For the first time, Ivy's composure cracked. She stammered, tried to backtrack, but my lawyer kept pressing until the truth started spilling out in broken sentences. Ivy admitted she never actually saw me with anyone. She had only heard rumors and put two and two together. She admitted she took the money, but insisted she would have paid it back eventually. Edward's head dropped into his hands. I sat perfectly still, every muscle in my body trembling with restrained emotion. This was the moment I had dreamed of, the moment the lies unraveled in front of everyone. But instead of triumph, what I felt was an ache. Deep, old, tired. Because no matter what happened next, nothing would give me back the nights I spent crying into my pillow, the days I spent believing I was worthless. When Ivy stepped down from the stand, Edward wouldn't look at her. He wouldn't look at me either. It was my turn. My lawyer led me to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. My voice was steady as I told the story, not just of the night I was thrown out, but of the weeks leading up to it, the small cuts and quiet humiliations, the way Edward's silence hurt more than any scream could have. When I spoke about the infection, the hospital stay, the fear that kept me up at night, my voice caught just once. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my breathing. I love my husband, I said finally. I would have given him my life, but I will not carry lies that were never mine to bear. I am here to clear my name, not just for me, but because truth still matters. When I stepped down, I saw Grace wipe a tear from her cheek. My father's jaw was set like stone, but there was pride in his eyes. The judge called for a recess. As we stepped out into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Edward standing alone near the water fountain. For a moment, he looked like the man I used to know, lost, hurting, human. Our eyes met, but neither of us spoke. This was just the first day of testimony, and already the cracks were showing. The next session would bring Edward to the stand, and when he spoke, the last pieces of the truth would finally fall into place. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that, but I knew I would face it, because I had come too far to stop now. The next day, the courtroom was even more crowded. Word had spread, and people wanted to see what would happen when Edward took the stand. He looked composed as he walked up, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. My lawyer's questioning was careful, respectful at first, but direct. "Mr. Whitaker, when your daughter accused Nora of infidelity, did you ask for any proof?" Edward's jaw worked. "No." "Did you speak to Nora about the accusations before asking her to leave the house?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No." "So you made a decision that changed her life, without ever hearing her side?" He swallowed hard. "Yes." "Why?" Edward's eyes flicked toward me. For a moment, I thought he might refuse to answer, but then he said quietly, "Because I believe my daughter. Because I was afraid the rumors were true." "And now," my lawyer pressed, "do you still believe them?" Edward's shoulders sagged. "No, I don't." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "Do you understand the damage those accusations caused?" Edward's voice broke. "I do now." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I should have trusted you. I should have fought for you. And I didn't." I felt my throat tighten, but I held his gaze. This was the apology I had once begged for. Hearing it in front of strangers didn't undo what happened, but it mattered. It mattered more than I expected. The questioning continued, covering the financial records, Ivy's withdrawals, the messages. Edward admitted he had been blind, that he hadn't wanted to see the truth about his daughter's behavior. The weight of that admission seemed to crush him where he sat. When he stepped down, Ivy refused to meet his eyes. The closing arguments were sharp and unrelenting. My lawyer painted a clear picture of the harm done. Not just gossip, but deliberate defamation, the kind that tears lives apart. Edward's lawyer tried to soften the blow, arguing that it had been a family misunderstanding gone too far, but the evidence was overwhelming. I sat perfectly still through it all, my hands folded in my lap, my heart calm. Whatever the verdict would be, I knew I had spoken my truth. I had been heard. When the judge returned with the decision, the entire room held its breath. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Nora Whitaker," the judge said clearly. "The accusations made against her were false and defamatory. The defendants are ordered to issue a public retraction and compensate her for damages, both financial and emotional." The gavel struck. It was over. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. Grace squeezed my hand so hard I almost laughed through my tears. My mother cried openly. My father nodded once, the pride in his face unmistakable. Edward stood, his face pale. When I rose to leave, he stepped toward me. "Nora," he said, his voice low, "I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk? Not as husband and wife, just as two people who shared a life." I looked at him for a long moment. The man who had once been my whole world now stood before me as a stranger. A stranger who had finally seen the truth. "Maybe one day," I said quietly, "but not today." I turned and walked out of the courtroom into the sunlight. The air felt different, lighter, sharper, alive. The weight I had carried for so long was gone. I wasn't the woman who left with a suitcase that night. I wasn't the woman who cried herself to sleep on Grace's couch. I wasn't the woman who begged to be believed. I was free, and whatever came next, new love, new beginnings, new battles, I would face it standing tall. Because this time, the story was mine. The verdict was still ringing in my ears when I woke up the next morning. Sunlight spilled across my room, warm and golden, as if the world had shifted overnight. I lay there for a long moment, listening to the quiet, realizing that for the first time in months, my chest didn't feel heavy. But outside my little bubble, the world was buzzing. Grace burst into the kitchen, holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting the screen toward me. Headlines were everywhere. Court rules in favor of Nora Whitaker. There were photos of me leaving the courthouse, my head high, my family behind me. The story was being shared on every platform, strangers weighing in, calling it justice served. Then came the fallout. Edward's business issued a statement that morning, confirming that he was stepping back temporarily to focus on family matters. Several of his partners were quoted expressing disappointment at how things had been handled. The perfect, polished image Edward had built for himself was cracking in public view. And Ivy, her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The public retraction was court-ordered, and she had to post it on her social media accounts. Seeing her type out the words, "I lied about Nora. I made false accusations that hurt her and my father," must have been torture for her. The comments flooded in, some scolding her, some offering pity, but all of them forcing her to sit with what she had done. I read it all quietly, sipping my tea. There was no gloating, no sense of victory dancing in my chest. Just a deep, resonant calm. The truth was finally out there. People could believe what they wanted. I had nothing left to prove. But that didn't mean the pain was gone. That night, I walked through the city house alone, touching the furniture, the photographs, the walls I had painted. I let myself cry, not from grief this time, but from release. Every tear felt like another chain snapping free. Over the next few days, I kept to myself. Grace and my mother visited, bringing food and gentle laughter. My father came by one evening, sitting on the porch with me as the sun set. "You did what most people can't," he said quietly. "You faced the truth head-on and didn't flinch." I flinched, I admitted, smiling sadly. But I didn't run. That's what matters. Even with the victory, there were moments of heaviness. Nights where I woke from dreams of that night Edward told me to pack my things, days where I saw Ivy's face in my mind and felt anger rising again. But I let myself feel it all. I wrote it in my journal. I talked about it in therapy, and slowly the sharp edges dulled. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Edward. "I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like to speak with you. Just once, if you're willing." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart a jumble of emotions. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part of me needed to hear what he had to say. I typed back one word, "tomorrow," and for the first time since the trial, I felt a flicker of nerves. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about closure. Tomorrow, I would face Edward, not as his wife, not as the woman he had thrown out, but as the woman who had survived everything and was still standing. And he would have to see me as I am now. The next day, I arrived at the small cafe just after noon. It was quiet, tucked away from the main road, the kind of place where no one would bother us. Edward was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee between us. "Good," I said softly, surprising even myself. "Because I'm not here to make this easier for you." He looked up, pain etched deep in his face. "Then why did you come?" Because I needed to say this to you. I needed you to know that I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry this weight any longer. What you did broke something in me, Edward, but it didn't destroy me. I won't let it. His eyes glistened. You really forgive me? Yes, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means I get to walk forward without this pain holding me hostage. Edward nodded slowly, tears slipping down his cheeks. I don't expect you to come back. I needed you to hear that I am trying to be better. For Ivy. For myself. I've started therapy. I'm learning how to see my daughter clearly, not just as the little girl I wanted her to be. There was something almost heartbreaking about watching him. The man who had once been my safe place, trying to rebuild himself from the ground up. I hope you do get better, I said gently. I hope Ivy does too. But that journey is yours, not mine. We sat in silence for a moment. There was no dramatic ending, no sweeping music, no sudden reconciliation. Just two people sitting across a table, acknowledging the wreckage between them and choosing to leave it where it lay. When I finally stood, Edward didn't stop me. He only said, "Thank you." As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun hit my face. I felt lighter than I had in years. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. And now that I had given it, I was free to build something entirely new. When I got back to my city house, Grace was waiting with 2 glasses of wine. "So?" she asked. "So," I said with a small smile, "I think that chapter is finally closed." And for the first time, I truly meant it. The day I signed the last paper, the lawyer slid the pen back across the table like it was no more than ordinary office work. But for me, it felt like something holy, the closing of the door that had been gaping open for months. My parents had been insistent about one thing. Whatever I rebuilt with their gift must matter. Not revenge, not displays. Purpose. I named it the Whitaker Trust for Truth and Healing, an awkwardly formal name for something that felt like breathing. The first thing we did was fund a small community clinic and a legal aid fund for women who'd been publicly shamed or falsely accused. We set aside grants for mental health counseling in neighborhoods that didn't have access. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been dragged through courts, scandal, and shame, and now my money would help others stand when everything fell away. Setting up the trust was work in the gentlest, most exacting way. My parents loved the meetings, my father sitting solemn and steady, while my mother argued over font choices for the website like she was choosing curtains for Sunday dinner. Grace kept me fed, drove me to endless appointments, and sat with me at difficult stakeholder meetings, rolling her eyes in exactly the right places. I learned to talk about trauma with professionals without pulling myself apart. I learned legalese. I learned how to take a microphone. The first event we ran was small and messy, a ribbon cutting at the clinic with flourishes and too many speeches. There were photographers, a local reporter who had once written a less than flattering column about me, and a line of women waiting in the clinic lobby who refused to give their names. They were quiet, worn, their eyes like mine were for months, tired, warily hopeful. I stood in front of them and tried to find the right words. "This is for you," I said. "If you have nowhere else to go, come here. If you need someone to listen when the town shouts, we will listen." A woman in the front row came up after the little ceremony and hugged me so hard I felt my ribs jar. She smelled like eucalyptus and cigarettes. "My name is Maria," she said into my shoulder. They said the same things about me. She held on like she needed a body to keep standing. I let her. Letting people lean on me felt foreign and right both. Opening the trust didn't cleanse the past. There were nights when I still woke thinking of my suitcase on the driveway, my wedding ring cold in my palm. There were mornings when I saw Ivy's face in the corner of my mind and felt the old sharpness. But the pain began to have a shape. It had edges I could touch, and that made it something I could treat. People began to notice a different kind of attention. The papers called me a philanthropist and a survivor, labels I didn't seek, but that made it easier for me to do my work. At meetings where Edward used to sit on boards, I found myself being introduced with a polite nod and an awkward, "We're so glad Nora could join us." His name still opened doors he'd helped build. My name opened doors I was working to keep open for others. Not everything in my life was improved by the trust. My own therapy was slow and stubborn. I rescheduled sessions when grief was fresh and found that some days talking helped and others opened new wounds. I had to learn how to live with the knowledge that forgiveness and forgetting are separate acts. I forgave Edward in the small, personal way we'd negotiated over coffee, so it could stop dragging me down. But forgetting was a different beast I never agreed to. Ivy made a court-ordered retraction, which felt to me like a first step at accountability, but the retraction could not take back the nights she had stolen from me. I got one letter of apology. It came folded and precise. An apology, not for everything, but for the moment she recognized she'd been cruel. I didn't answer. Some victories were small and close. I bought back a sweater of his that I had loved, an insignificant thing, maybe, but when I picked it from a charity shop, I realized how much of my life had been handed off to other people. I made a new habit of keeping important things at my house. A new set of photos, a little plant I remembered to water. These rituals were tiny repairs. Work at the trust grew. We funded scholarships for girls who had been forced to drop out of school because of gossip or family scandal. We funded 2 positions for trauma counselors in the clinic. I sat in intake rooms and listened to women tell me stories that would have made me flinch once. Now I sat, and I listened with the fierce attention of someone who had been there. My voice, once smothered by accusation, became a tool. I learned to ask the questions that untied the knots in people's chests. One winter charity ball, the crowd was larger than I expected. I walked into the marquee tent and found myself caught off guard. There was a woman at the buffet I had helped last year, the same woman who'd hugged me hard in the clinic's lobby. She came rushing across the carpet and gripped my hands. "You gave my daughter a scholarship," she said, voice bright and raw. "She's in college now. She wanted me to tell you thank you." Her eyes shimmered. She had a light in them I recognized, the light of someone rebuilding. That night, as I watched couples dance and heard laughter rise like helium balloons, I let myself feel the small, precise warmth of accomplishment. I thought of the hours in therapy and the slow, patient work of being a person again. People said I'd been vindicated and that the law had done what the law could. But my private vindication was this: the knowledge that the resources I had been given were not going back into a bank account to be hoarded. They were moving into rooms where people could speak without being judged, where misfortune wouldn't become a sentence. Not everything was perfect. There were awkward run-ins. A board member of one of Edward's old companies deliberately avoided eye contact one afternoon at a civic event. A social influencer wrote a mean piece about how people like me play victim for likes. Those stung, but they were smaller than the wounds that had opened that first night. Most of the time, I felt gratitude for Grace, who still knocked on my door at dawn with coffee, for my parents who had built me back without taking away my agency, for the quiet mornings where I could make a decision and it would be mine alone. Months later, I took a trip alone, a weekend on the coast where the wind felt like someone raking through the things stuck in my hair. Walking on the sand, I watched gulls cut through gray light. A woman jogged by with her child in a stroller and waved, the kind of simple human warmth I had stopped believing in some nights. I smiled because it was real. It wasn't proof of anything except life moving forward. On the plane back to the city, I opened my journal and wrote a line that surprised me with its simplicity. I am here, not because I fought to stay in someone else's story, but because I wrote a new one. The sentence felt true and deep and complete. I had not sought the court's attention as a trophy. I had sought to be seen. There would be new decisions to make. There would be days I'd be tested. But when I stepped into the city house that night and flipped on the lights, I felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had learned the hard work of safety. I made myself a cup of tea and sat near the window, watching the city glow like a scatter of promises. The future wasn't clean. It was not tidy, but it was mine. For now, that was enough. It had been 3 months since the verdict when I finally allowed myself a slow afternoon in the city. The work at the trust had consumed me. Paperwork, board meetings, endless planning sessions. But today I was free. I sat at a corner table in a small cafe not far from the courthouse, sipping a latte and watching the lights slant across the pavement outside. I opened my journal and wrote just one line. This is what peace feels like. Nora. The voice startled me. I looked up, and there was Cole, the investigator who had once been my quiet anchor through the storm. He looked the same, steady, neatly dressed, his expression calm, but there was a softness in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. "Cole," I said, smiling despite myself. "What are you doing here?" He gestured to the counter. "Coffee run." I was passing by, and, well, I almost didn't believe it was you sitting here looking this relaxed. I laughed softly. Relaxed is a new development. He glanced at the chair across from me. "Mind if I join you?" I hesitated just a fraction of a second. Old habits, old walls, then nodded. "Sure." He sat, setting his cup down. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two people who had survived a battlefield together. "You look good," he said finally. "Better. Stronger." "That's the goal," I said. "I still have bad days, but I'm learning how to live again." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's not easy. Most people, after something like what you went through, they stay stuck. You didn't." I shrugged, tracing the rim of my mug with my finger. "I had to choose, Cole. Staying stuck would have meant letting them win. And you don't strike me as someone who likes losing." That made me laugh. A real laugh, not the brittle one I had forced so many times over the past year. "You always did have good instincts." We fell into easy conversation after that. He asked about the trust, about the clinic opening, about the scholarship program. I told him about Grace's endless teasing and my parents' pride. He told me he had taken fewer cases lately, focusing on ones where he felt he could actually make a difference. "Burnout?" I asked. "Maybe," he said with a half smile. "Or maybe I just got spoiled working with clients who refused to quit." The words warmed me more than the coffee. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen in a way that didn't involve courtrooms or headlines. When we finished our drinks, neither of us moved to leave. Finally, Cole tilted his head toward the window. "You want to walk? There's a park a block away." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because saying yes felt like stepping into a new version of myself. But then I heard my own voice say yes. The park was quiet, dotted with late afternoon sun. We walked slowly, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about a case he once worked on in another state, one that haunted him still. I told him about the first time I laughed after the trial, how strange it had felt, how guilty and free at the same time. "You're allowed to laugh, you know," he said gently. "I know," I said, "but it feels fragile sometimes. Like if I laugh too much, I'll forget what it cost me to get here." "Or maybe," he said softly, "laughing is how you honor what it cost you. You didn't survive to stay sad forever." That stopped me. I turned to look at him, his face calm and steady, but his eyes holding something I couldn't name. And for a moment, standing there in the sunlight, I felt something shift inside me. A door I hadn't realized was still locked creaked open. By the time we circled back to the cafe, the sun was beginning to set. He walked me to my car, hands in his pockets, a comfortable silence stretching between us. "Listen," he said as I opened the door, "I've been meaning to ask, do you still have those security concerns about the trust? The anonymous emails?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. We've had a few. Nothing major, but enough to make the board nervous." "Let me look into it for you," he offered. "No charge. Call it unfinished business." I smiled, something warm blooming in my chest. "I might take you up on that." When I got home that evening, Grace was waiting with a glass of wine. "You're smiling," she said, narrowing her eyes playfully. "Where have you been?" "Just had coffee with someone," I said lightly. She sipped her wine. Would this someone happen to be tall, quiet, and very good at digging up dirt? I rolled my eyes, laughing. "You're impossible." "Just saying," Grace said with a grin. "You deserve to smile like that more often." Later that night, I sat at my desk with my journal open. My pen hovered over the page before I finally wrote. "Saw Cole today. Felt good. Alive. Like maybe the world isn't just about surviving anymore." I closed the journal and sat back, staring at the ceiling. For months, I had built walls around my heart, telling myself I didn't need anyone, that love was a battlefield I would never walk onto again. But tonight, for the first time, I wondered if those walls were meant to stay up forever, or if maybe, just maybe, it was time to open the door and let a little light in. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. The thought of seeing Cole again didn't scare me, and that felt like its own kind of victory. When I finally went to bed, I slept without dreams, my breathing even, my body loose and light against the sheets. Morning would come soon enough, and maybe, just maybe, I was ready for it. Cole showed up at the trust a week later, just like he said he would. He was all business at first, asking about the anonymous emails, reviewing security protocols, talking to staff. But every so often, I caught him watching me, his gaze thoughtful, like he was trying to measure how much of the old Nora still lingered and how much had been remade in the fire. When we wrapped up the review, he lingered by my office door. "There's a place near here with good food," he said casually. "Want to grab dinner?" My instinct was to decline. Dinner meant more than coffee. Dinner meant stepping into territory I hadn't dared touch since before the trial. But then I heard Grace's teasing voice in my head, "You deserve to smile like that more often." And I surprised myself by nodding. "Sure," I said. "Dinner sounds nice." The restaurant was small and warm, with candles on the tables and music low enough to let us talk. Cole ordered something hearty. I went for pasta and a glass of wine. At first, the conversation stayed light. Work, current events, the latest developments of the trust. But somewhere between the entree and dessert, the tone shifted. "I keep thinking about that night," Cole said quietly, setting down his fork. "The night you were thrown out. I went over the files so many times. I kept wondering if there was something more I could have done, some way to stop it sooner." I took a slow sip of wine. "You already did more than anyone else. You believed me." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I did, but I also saw what it did to you. And I hated that I couldn't shield you from all of it." The honesty in his voice was disarming. I looked at him across the table and saw not just the investigator who had worked my case, but a man who had carried some of my pain with him, even when he didn't have to. "You were there," I said softly, "when everyone else turned away. That mattered." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy in a different way, filled with everything neither of us had said until now. After dinner, we walked back to the parking lot under a sky thick with stars. Cole paused beside my car. "I'd like to see you again," he said. Not a question, just a simple truth laid bare. Something in me wanted to run, to slam the door shut before it opened too far. But instead, I found myself nodding. "I'd like that too." Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more often. Sometimes it was coffee near the courthouse. Sometimes he stopped by the trust to check in on security issues that were mostly resolved. Other times, we just sat together in quiet spaces, talking about nothing in particular. I learned that he had grown up in a small town, that he loved books almost as much as I did, that he had once wanted to be a teacher before becoming an investigator. He learned about my therapy sessions, my parents' insistence on Sunday dinners, Grace's habit of leaving notes around my house just to make me laugh. I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone else, about the nights I woke up screaming, about the guilt I still carried even though I had been vindicated, about the anger that still bubbled up when I thought of Ivy. He listened. He never interrupted, never tried to fix it, just let me get the words out and stayed steady while I did. One night, after a particularly long day at the trust, he came over with takeout. We sat on my couch, eating noodles from the carton, and I felt the exhaustion in my bones. "You don't always have to be strong," Cole said quietly. I blinked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's okay to have bad days. It's okay to cry. You don't have to carry the whole world by yourself." The words hit harder than I expected. I set the carton down and pressed my hands to my face. Before I knew it, tears were spilling over. Cole didn't move closer, didn't try to stop them. He just sat there, his quiet presence like an anchor. "It's not fair," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I lost everything, my home, my marriage, my name, and I had to fight tooth and nail just to get a sliver of it back. And I still wake up some mornings and wonder if maybe they were right about me. If maybe I was the problem all along." "You weren't," Cole said firmly. "I saw the evidence. I saw you. You were never the problem." I looked up at him then, and something in my chest cracked open. I wasn't sure if it was pain or relief, maybe both. For the first time in a long time, I let someone hold my gaze without looking away. After that night, something shifted between us. It wasn't a dramatic change. No grand declarations, no whirlwind romance, just a slow, steady deepening. He became part of my days in small, quiet ways. He sent me articles he thought I'd like, reminded me to eat when I got too busy, made me laugh with dry one-liners that caught me off guard. Grace, of course, noticed immediately. "You're different," she said one morning over coffee. "Softer. Happier." "I'm just breathing easier," I said, but I knew she could hear the smile in my voice. Grace said knowingly. "Breathing easier has a name, doesn't it?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. One weekend, Cole invited me to a community fair just outside the city. At first, I almost said no. Crowds still made me anxious sometimes, but he promised it would be low-key. And he was right. The fair was small, full of families and local vendors. We walked past booths selling handmade soap and fresh pies, sipping lemonade and laughing like we were just two ordinary people on an ordinary day. At one point, we sat on a bench near the edge of the fairground, watching children chase each other across the grass. "I used to want this," I said quietly, surprising myself. "Want what?" Cole asked. "A family. A house full of kids. The whole picture-perfect life. And now," I thought about it for a moment, "now I just want peace. And maybe someone to sit on the porch with me when the sun goes down." Cole's expression softened. "I think you deserve that." We sat in silence for a long moment, the late afternoon light golden around us. And for the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like if that someone was him. Later that night, when he dropped me off at home, we lingered at the door. "Thank you," I said softly. "For today. For all of it." He smiled, that quiet, steady smile that had begun to feel like a safe place. "Any time." I went inside, leaning against the door after I closed it, my heart pounding in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. That night in my journal, I wrote, "Maybe I am ready. Not for everything, not all at once, but for something, for joy." And as I put the pen down, I realized I was smiling. 2 weeks after the fair, Cole invited me to a dinner I couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't work-related, though he mentioned it was for a cause he supported. It wasn't casual either, the kind of invitation you send in a text with a small hesitation, the kind you want someone to say yes to. I stood in front of my mirror the night of the dinner, smoothing down the soft navy dress I had chosen. It wasn't too formal, but it wasn't casual either. Grace sat on my bed, sipping wine and grinning like the Cheshire Cat. "You're glowing," she teased. "I'm not glowing," I said, though my smile betrayed me. "Oh, you're glowing," Grace said, laughing. "Look at you. Nervous, but excited. It's been a long time since I've seen you like this." I sighed, slipping on my shoes. "It's scary," I admitted. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to say, I don't deserve to be happy." Grace stood and hugged me. "You deserve this, Nora. Don't let fear steal this from you." Cole was waiting outside the restaurant when I arrived. He looked different tonight. Not just because he had swapped his usual button-down for a dark suit, but because there was a softness in his expression that made my breath catch. "You look," he paused, as if the right word was just out of reach. "Beautiful." "Thank you," I said quietly, my cheeks warming. The dinner was small, intimate, a fundraiser for a literacy program Cole volunteered with. He introduced me to people who clearly respected him, and I found myself slipping into conversation easily. There was no judgment in their eyes, no whispered curiosity about my past, just warmth. It felt strange and wonderful. At one point, as we listened to a speaker talk about rebuilding lives through education, Cole's hand brushed mine under the table. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a ripple through me. I didn't pull away. After the dinner, we walked outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered, and for a moment we stood in silence, just breathing it in. "Thank you for coming," Cole said finally. "It meant a lot to have you there." "I'm glad you asked," I said, and I meant it. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his expression open and unguarded. "Nora, I don't want to push you. I know you've been through hell and back, but I need you to know I care about you, more than I probably should." My heart pounded. For a moment, the old fear reared up, the instinct to retreat, to slam every door shut and keep myself safe. But then I remembered the journal entry I had written. Maybe I am ready. I took a step closer. "I care about you too," I said softly. "And that scares me. But I don't want to keep living like I'm still on trial. I want to try. With you." Cole's smile was small but brilliant, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He reached out, slowly, giving me time to pull back if I needed to. I didn't. When his hand closed around mine, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. That night didn't end with grand gestures or declarations. It ended with us sitting on a quiet bench outside the restaurant, talking until the city grew quiet around us. He told me about the first time he saw me walk into his office, how determined and terrified I had been. I told him about the night I realized I had survived, how it felt to wake up and not hate myself. When he finally walked me to my car, he didn't kiss me. He just squeezed my hand and said, "Good night, Nora." And somehow, that meant more than anything else. In the days that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Light. I hummed while making coffee. I looked forward to evenings. I caught myself smiling at strangers. Grace, of course, noticed. "You're officially impossible to be around," she said one morning, though she was grinning, all glowing and mysterious. Spill. I just laughed because there were no words big enough for what I was feeling. One weekend, Cole invited me to his apartment for dinner. It was simple: pasta, salad, a bottle of wine. But it felt intimate in a way that made my chest ache. After we ate, we sat on his couch, talking in low voices. At some point, the conversation trailed off, and there was only silence, warm, expectant. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Tell me if this is too much," he said. I shook my head. When he kissed me, it wasn't desperate or demanding. It was slow, careful, like he was asking a question and giving me all the time in the world to answer. And my answer was yes. That night, as I drove home, I rolled down the windows and let the cool air wash over me. For so long, I had been living like a shadow of myself. But now I felt alive. Not because of Cole, though he was part of it. Because I had chosen this. I had chosen joy, chosen to risk being hurt again, chosen to live. For the first time since everything began, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, standing at the beginning of something new, something good. And I was ready for it. What you just saw is proof that the darkest nights do end. If you believe in second chances and taking back your life, tap that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs hope tonight. The night of the gala felt like stepping into a dream I had once been too scared to imagine. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, gold and silver catching the light like stars. Tables were set with crisp linens, the Trust logo printed on elegant menus. Guests in formal wear filled the space with soft laughter, clinking glasses, quiet anticipation. Backstage, I stood in front of a mirror, smoothing my dress with trembling hands. Grace adjusted my necklace for the 5th time. "You're shaking," she said softly. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if I freeze? What if I mess up?" Grace caught my gaze in the mirror. "You fought in a courtroom where the whole town watched you get torn apart, and you didn't freeze. This is yours. You're not fighting anymore. You're leading." My mother came in just then, her face glowing with pride. "You're ready," she said. "We're all here for you." Cole stepped inside last. He didn't say much. He just squeezed my hand. And somehow that was all I needed. When I walked onto the stage, the room fell quiet. I gripped the podium, feeling the weight of 100 eyes, cameras flashing. For a heartbeat, I was back in the courtroom, back under scrutiny. But then I saw Grace smiling in the front row, my parents sitting together, Cole's steady presence beside them. And I breathed. "Good evening," I began. My voice was steady. A year ago, I stood in a very different room, in front of a very different crowd, trying to convince people that I was telling the truth. Tonight, I stand here not as someone who was accused, not as someone who had to defend herself, but as someone who survived and rebuilt. I let that sink in before continuing. The trust was born from pain, yes. But more importantly, it was born from hope. Hope that no one should lose their name, their home, or their peace without a fight. Hope that even when lies try to destroy you, the truth can still rise. There was a murmur of agreement, a soft swell of applause that gave me courage. "I am not here to rehash the past," I said. "I am here to show that there is life after devastation. There is purpose after betrayal. And tonight, with your help, we will make sure that others find." The morning after the gala, I woke to a dozen unread messages, congratulatory texts, links to glowing articles about the event, even a voicemail from a reporter asking for an interview. But there was one message that made my heart stop cold. It was from Ivy. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," it read. "But I need to see you. Just once. Please." I stared at the screen for a long time, my coffee growing cold beside me. The old anger stirred, but beneath it was something quieter, curiosity. I had stood on a stage last night and told a room full of strangers that healing was possible. Maybe this was my next step. There was a murmur of agreement, a soft swell of applause that gave me courage. "I'm not here to rehash the past," I said. "I am here to show that there is life after devastation. There is purpose after betrayal. And tonight, with your help, we will make sure that others find. The morning after the gala, I woke to a dozen unread messages, congratulatory texts, links to glowing articles about the event, even a voicemail from a reporter asking for an interview. But there was one message that made my heart stop cold. It was from Ivy. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," it read. "But I need to see you. Just once. Please." I stared at the screen for a long time, my coffee growing cold beside me. The old anger stirred, but beneath it was something quieter, curiosity. I had stood on a stage last night and told a room full of strangers that healing was possible. Maybe this was my next step. I texted her back one word: tomorrow. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Ivy looked smaller than I remembered, like she had been living in shadow. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. When I walked in, she stood as if unsure whether she was allowed to, then sat quickly again. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice hoarse. I sat opposite her, but didn't speak. I let the silence stretch until she shifted in her chair. "I needed to tell you I'm sorry," she said finally. "For everything. For lying. For tearing your life apart. For taking Dad's side when I knew it was wrong." I folded my hands, studying her. "Why now?" She swallowed hard, twisting a paper napkin in her hands. "Because I can't sleep. Because every time I look in a mirror, I see what I did. I'm in therapy now, court-ordered, but it's helping. And my therapist said I needed to take responsibility." Ivy's words tumbled out, shaky but real. She told me about losing her job, about the friends who had turned their backs, about the crushing loneliness that had followed. She told me about nights she drank too much just to quiet the guilt, mornings she woke up hating herself. "And yet," I said slowly, "you still did those things." Tears pooled in her eyes. "I know, and I'd undo them if I could. But I can't. All I can do is say I'm sorry, and keep trying to be better." For a long moment, I just breathed. Then I said quietly, "I believe you're trying. But this doesn't erase what you did. You don't get to be in my life just because you regret it." Ivy nodded, tears spilling over now. "I know. I hope someday you can forgive me, even if I never hear you say it." When I left the cafe, I felt strangely lighter. I hadn't forgiven her. Not yet, but I had faced her without rage consuming me. And that was progress. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. "Edward." I carried the letter out to my porch before opening it, the late afternoon light warm against my skin. "Nora," it began, "I won't ask for anything. I won't even ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I have been watching from a distance, and I am proud of you. Proud that you fought for the truth. Proud that you are building something so good out of something so painful. You deserve better from me, from all of us. I'm trying to be a better man, though I know I may never get the chance to show you. Take care of yourself, Nora. I hope you find happiness that has nothing to do with any of us. Edward." I read the letter twice before setting it down. There were no tears this time, no sharp twist of grief. Just a deep exhale like setting down a heavy weight I'd carried too long. That night, I sat with Cole on the porch as the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it. Like I've been carrying a heavy bag so long I forgot I could put it down. And now it's just gone. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Sounds like freedom." It does. He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "So what are you going to do with it?" I laughed softly. "Live. Really live." The next few days were filled with moments that felt small but monumental. Cooking dinner with Grace and my parents, laughing until my sides hurt, walking through the clinic and hearing a woman tell a volunteer the trust had saved her life, rereading Edward's letter once more before tucking it away in a drawer. I wasn't healed completely, maybe I never would be, but I was whole enough to move forward. And that was enough. One evening, Cole took me to the roof of a downtown building, a place with a perfect view of the skyline. The wind tugged at my hair, the lights blinking below us. I used to think this city hated me, I admitted. Every corner felt like it was whispering what happened to me. But now it feels like mine again. "That's because you claimed it back," Cole said. I turned to him, something warm blooming in my chest. "Thank you. I said softly. For being here. For staying. He smiled, steady as ever. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time, I believed him. That night, I went home and opened my journal. For months, I had filled its pages with grief and anger, questions and doubts. Tonight, I wrote just one line. I am free. Spring came to the city in a slow, hesitant way. Rain washing the streets clean, flowers breaking through stubborn soil. And with it came a new rhythm to my life. Cole, and I had fallen into something that felt natural, unforced. He stopped by the trust twice a week, sometimes with files under his arm, sometimes with nothing but coffee for both of us. Grace teased us endlessly, but even she admitted it was good to see me smiling again. One Saturday morning, Cole invited me to help at a community outreach event he was running. Free legal aid for families who couldn't afford representation. We spent the day in a crowded church basement, handing out forms, answering questions, connecting people to resources. By the end of the day, my feet ached and my voice was hoarse, but my heart was full. You're good at this, Cole said as we packed up tables. Good at what? I asked, wiping my hands on a napkin. Helping people. Meeting them where they are. It's not easy to do after what you've been through. I smiled faintly. Maybe that's why I can do it. I know what it's like to be on the other side of the table. Later that week, the board approved a major expansion plan for the trust, a second clinic on the other side of the city, plus funding for 3 more counselors and a legal team. It was the biggest step we had taken yet. That night, I stood in the middle of the empty new building, dust motes swirling in the air, imagining what it would look like when it was full of people, full of hope. Cole joined me, his hands in his pockets, and we walked through room by room. You're building something huge here, he said quietly. We're building it, I corrected, smiling at him. He reached for my hand, and this time it didn't feel new or fragile. It just felt right. A few nights later, we had dinner with Grace and my parents at my house. The table was full of food and laughter, the kind that made my chest ache in the best way. My father raised a glass halfway through the meal. To Nora, he said, his voice proud, who turned a battlefield into a beacon. Cole turned to me then, his expression soft. I'd like to be part of that future, if you'll let me. Something in me settled at those words, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I want that too, I said. By early summer, the second clinic was ready to open. The ribbon cutting was smaller than the gala, but just as meaningful. Children ran through the halls, volunteers bustled with clipboards, and the air buzzed with new beginnings. After the ceremony, Cole found me standing outside, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. Penny for your thoughts? He asked. I was just thinking, I said slowly, that a year ago I thought my life was over. And now I can't imagine anything but this. Cole slipped an arm around my shoulders. That's because you fought for it. I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder. We fought for it, I corrected. That night, back at my house, we sat together in the quiet, the sound of summer crickets drifting through the open window. Cole turned to me, his face serious. Nora, he said, you've done something extraordinary. You've taken everything that tried to break you and turned it into something that saves people. You should be proud of that. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. I am proud, but I'm also grateful, because I didn't do it alone. We sat like that for a long time, the room dim except for the glow of the lamp. And I realized something. I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't waiting for the past to crash back down on me. For the first time, I was simply present. Cole, I said softly. Yeah, I think I'm ready. His expression softened as he understood. Are you sure? I nodded. Yes, for all of it. For you. What happened next was not dramatic or rushed. It was tender, careful, 2 people finding each other after everything had been stripped away. When it was over, we lay together in quiet peace, the night deep and soft around us. You okay? Cole whispered. I smiled into the dark. I've never been better. Later, as he slept beside me, I reached for my journal on the nightstand. I wrote, this is what it feels like to be whole. This is what it feels like to be loved without fear. And for the first time, I didn't close the journal with a sense of finality, but with a sense that the story was still being written, and that was a beautiful thing. The courthouse looked different in the spring light. I stood at the bottom of its wide stone steps, staring up at the building where my world had cracked apart and then been stitched back together. The air smelled like rain, clean and sharp, and the sound of traffic hummed in the distance. I climbed the steps slowly, my hand brushing the rail, as if to remind myself this was real. The last time I'd stood here, I had been terrified, bracing for judgment. Today, I felt none of that. Just a quiet strength that settled deep in my bones. I sat on the top step and let the memories come. The flash of cameras, the whispers, the way my legs had trembled as I walked into that courtroom. And then, the moment the verdict was read, the rush of air leaving my lungs, the dizzying relief. I survived this, I whispered aloud. And I'm still here. A couple passed by, glancing curiously at me, but I didn't care. This was my moment, my ritual of closure. Later that day, I met Grace at the trust office. She had blueprints spread across the table, her hair tied up as she pointed at them excitedly. "This is the third clinic," she said, eyes shining. And I was thinking, what if we partner with the local university to get interns in social work and law? It could double our reach. I leaned over the plans, imagining the rooms filled with people finding hope. "Do it," I said. "Let's make it happen." Grace grinned. "You've been different lately, you know. Bolder. I think I finally believe I deserve to take up space," I said softly. "Not just survive quietly, but really take up space." That evening, Cole and I walked along the river. The water shimmered with the reflections of city lights. He carried 2 cups of tea, handing me one without a word. "Where did you go today?" he asked. "The courthouse," I said. I needed to see it one more time. How did it feel? Like closing a chapter. Like finally putting the book down and saying, "Okay, I know how this ends. Time to write a new one." He smiled, that steady, quiet smile that always seemed to anchor me. "And what's in the new one?" I looked at him, the cool breeze catching my hair. "You," I said simply, "and everything that comes next." His hand found mine, warm and certain. A week later, I got an email from a producer for a major news network. They wanted to feature me in a special segment on resilience and rebuilding after a public scandal. The thought made my stomach twist, the old instinct to hide, to stay small. But then I remembered how it felt standing on that gala stage, telling my story and watching a room full of people believe me. I hit reply and wrote, "Yes." Grace helped me prepare, running mock interviews in my kitchen while Cole sat at the counter, offering feedback. "You don't have to explain every detail," Cole reminded me. "You've already told your story once in court. This time, focus on what came after, on what you've built." By the time the day came, I felt ready. The studio lights were bright, the cameras intimidating, but when the interviewer asked me why I chose to speak publicly now, the words came easily. "Because silence almost killed me," I said. "Because there was a time when I thought the lies about me would define me forever. And now I know better. I know that the truth can win, and that we can rebuild from the ashes." When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers thanking me for sharing my journey, telling me about their own battles, their own small victories. That night, Cole and I sat on my porch, scrolling through the messages on my phone. "This is why you said yes," Cole said. "Not for you, for them." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I used to think my pain was pointless, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was meant to light the way for someone else. Cole wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "And now you're holding the torch." I rested my head on his shoulder, the quiet night wrapping around us. "Feels good," I said softly. "Feels right." And as the crickets sang and the stars blinked above us, I knew the past was no longer my cage. It was my story, and I was finally its author. The segment aired on a Sunday evening, and by Monday morning the trust's inbox was flooded. Donations poured in, volunteer applications tripled overnight, and letters arrived from across the country. Some were from women who had faced what I faced, others from fathers, brothers, and friends who said my story opened their eyes. Grace nearly cried when she showed me the numbers. "This is it, Nora. This is what we dreamed of. The trust isn't just local anymore, it's a movement." I stood in the middle of the office, looking around at the buzzing staff, the ringing phones, the hum of energy. For the first time, I felt like we were no longer reacting to my pain. We were building something bigger than me. A few days later, I received a small, plain envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a card with a single line, written in neat script. I'm still in therapy. I'm still trying. I hope someday we are both free. Ivy. I held the card for a long time. There was no anger in me this time, no sharp twist of bitterness. Just a quiet sadness and a hope that she really meant it. I tucked the card into the same drawer where I'd kept Edward's letter, not as a wound, but as a reminder that even broken things can heal if they choose to. The next big milestone came in the form of a gala dinner to celebrate the groundbreaking of the third clinic. This one was larger than the last, with sponsors from outside the city flying in to attend. Grace worked herself ragged, pulling it together, and Cole and I spent late nights helping her plan. The night of the event, I stood backstage again, but this time there was no fear, just pride. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause felt like a wave, warm and strong. When we started the trust, I said into the microphone, it was because one life had been torn apart by lies. Tonight, we are here because thousands of lies will be stitched back together by truth. The audience erupted, and I caught Grace wiping at her eyes in the front row. After the event, we hosted a quiet dinner at my house. My parents sat at one end of the table, Grace and Cole at the other. The air was full of chatter and clinking glasses. Look at you, my mother said, squeezing my hand. I wish your younger self could see this. I think she can, I said softly. I think she fought to get me here. Cole raised his glass. To Nora, he said, for showing all of us what it looks like to turn pain into power. Everyone echoed the toast, and I blinked back tears. The summer passed in a blur of progress. The second clinic was already running at full capacity, and the plans for the third were well underway. Cole and I took a short trip to the coast one weekend, our first real vacation together. We walked along the shoreline, our feet sinking into wet sand, the wind whipping our hair. I used to dream about this, I admitted as we stood watching the waves. Not just the beach, but this peace, this sense that my life was finally mine again. Cole took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. It was always yours. You just had to take it back. I leaned against him, smiling as the sun sank below the horizon. When we got back to the city, Grace surprised me with a framed newspaper article. The headline read, From Scandal to Savior. How Nora Whitaker is changing the conversation. You're a symbol now, Grace said with a grin. Get used to it. I laughed, shaking my head. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to be me. Maybe now, Grace said. Those are the same thing. One final moment of closure came unexpectedly. I was walking out of the trust one afternoon when I saw a familiar figure standing across the street. Ivy. She didn't approach, just lifted a hand in a small wave. I raised mine in return. No words were exchanged, but in that moment, I felt something settle inside me. Whatever she chose to do with her life from here was hers. And I wished her well. Months later, the third clinic opened with a ceremony attended by hundreds. As I cut the ribbon, cameras flashing all around, I felt the same sense of wonder I had felt that first night at the gala. Only this time, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about celebrating everything we had built. After the event, Cole and I went home, exhausted but happy. We sat on the porch steps, watching the stars. You did it, Cole said simply. We did it, I corrected, leaning against him. We sat there in silence for a long time, the night air cool around us. And I realized there was no part of me still waiting for the past to crash back down. The book was closed. The story was mine now. That night, I opened my journal one last time and wrote, I am no longer the woman who begged to be believed. I am no longer the woman who was betrayed. I am the woman who began again. And I'm still beginning. I closed the journal, set it on my nightstand, and smiled. The future stretched out ahead of me like a sunrise, bright, open, waiting. Hit like and subscribe if you believe silence can be turned into power. And if this wasn't enough, watch how this husband literally spat on his wife and humiliated her in front of the kids, unknowing to him. She was about to change his life. Video is now on screen. Click to watch it.